Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us, and a happy Friday. My name's Ali Hirji, joining you live from Durham College, where I work in both the AI Hub as well as the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. At our last Power Hour, when I was talking to CrowdStrike, and I was talking to an individual by the name of Serge, who had spoken to us a great deal about the importance of planning. Remember, he had mentioned that plans are important, but planning is much more important. And what he meant by that was that security operations is an active process, an operational matter, not something purely theoretical or something that we speak about. It's something that we do. And my guest today is someone who's going to talk to us about how security services integrate with practices within IT within certain organizations. Custom to my form, I'm going to start off with a little bit of context. How many of you have read the book by Khalid Hosseini called The Kite Runner or A Kite Runner? In that, he makes a very important statement, which I hold very true to myself. He says that it may be unfair and unjust, but it's true that a couple of hours or just a day alone, and the events of those couple of hours or the events of that particular day can reshape an entire lifetime. You may take 2 years to build a reputation in an industry, but it might take 30 seconds of a breach, of a cyber attack to literally destroy that reputation. Based on that, you've always heard of the term prevention is better than cure, or you've also heard of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And my guest today is someone who's going to be talking to us about the software development process, the DevOps process, and how security has become a part, an integral part, or at least should be an integral part of that operation. You know, they say that smart people can solve problems, rather, intellectuals can solve problems. The real geniuses can prevent them to begin with. One such genius today, Shlomo Bielak from Benchmark Corp, the CTO. Shlomo, welcome to the Power Hour.
Thank you. I like being called a genius. That's a perfect way to start.
And before we delve into the genius, I do want to give our audience a bit of an optic into what makes Shlomo. So let's begin with the t-shirt.
I mean, you try to enjoy your day. What happens is when you're not dealing with incidences and worrying about prevention, you figured out reduction. You can put on a smart and funny t-shirt like this awesome one.
Absolutely. And I have to ask it at the get-go because Mehdi Raza made it very public that he would like to know the inspirations behind all of your awesome backgrounds. So let's hear a little bit about your backgrounds before we jump into the topic.
Technically, they come out of the other conferences that I've done. Sometimes they want a common theme.
Yep.
So this one's from the Jonah Group, actually, which is a developer company in Toronto. They built it for each panelist, and I got a couple of these. This one makes me not wash out. The other one was too light, and then I disappeared into it. This one's a little darker, so I can stand out.
Fantastic. Shlomo, we've got an audience that comes from not just graduate students, we've got folks from different DevOps sectors, we have folks from security operations, we have folks who are looking to break into their next opportunity in security. We've got a plethora of folks from around the world. What I like to do at the start is I like to take them on a little bit of a journey and get them familiar with the concepts that we're talking about. You know, when I think about software development and DevOps, I don't like to conflate the two terms together. I think of them as two separate divisions. Can you talk to us about the differences between what we refer to as software development and what we refer to as DevOps?
Okay, so I kind of find software development has taken an approach where they actually create DevOps roles. Really, they're trying to say, how do I stop having hindrances and silos to deliver software to production, which is owned by another team? The ops team predominantly, but really there's so many different ways to say it. DevSecOps is where security and ops are part of the delivery, where you have regulatory requirements. I kind of see it as, let's have the mindset of working with between all these organizations so we can have a single method for getting there together for the customer. That's what it is. SDLC, which is your software development lifecycle, is more about how do I create artifacts that go into those environments. DevOps is more about how do I make those 3 or 4 teams get together to actually deliver it.
So it's about bringing in, you have individual teams and then bringing them together and integrating them. And in the world of DevOps, we talk a lot about CI, continuous integration, continuous development, so on and so forth. And we'll break down some of those terms as we move forward. I was reading an Isaka report on the state of cybersecurity, and this was in 2020. And they mentioned about 78% of the respondents mentioned that they found that it was important for DevOps folks now to have, or just software developers in general, to have a very good sense or to have a hold on cybersecurity practices and cybersecurity basic principles. How have you seen the industry change? Typically, software development and cybersecurity are even taught as separate theories, separate subjects within schools and within academia and within industry. How are you seeing the two of them come together?
Okay, so I have a little different perspective. I kind of see like if someone has a bailiwick, which is basically the area of their expertise, you can't go very wide. There's not that many people that can be soldiers of fortune of everything technology.
Yeah.
They got to be geniuses, and that's not going to be 90% of the people you have. So my context of the shift left is what they call it, shift security left. That is not a responsibility for the developer. People keep saying it's the developer requirement. They don't want it. They don't want to run production. They don't want to do security. So what you really need and what we can talk about is how does security then give a responsive model so you don't have to have a meeting to get through a particular gate. They show you how to integrate it with what they're doing today. I just find that's not the circumstance. Like they had all day DevOps. Elite DevOps people look more poorly on security. It's not that the security is getting worse. It's that as they advance, security is not. So DevSecOps is totally in its infancy. It's perceived as a checkbox of running tools with developers that check security. I'm like, running a tool does nothing. What does running a tool do? What is it fixing? What are you measuring? What's your thresholds? What's your policy for what you find? That's kind of a miss. I kind of feel like organizations get a breach and then they're like, DevSecOps, fix it. Oh, awesome. What'd you do? We added tools. I'm like, wow, DevSecOps has nothing to do with tools. So we can get into what they should be focusing on.
Yep. And I'd like to work on that a little bit because when I speak often to my students, I'm always talking about the aspect of, we talk about people, process, technology, but we also talk about the aspect of not just building your plan, but planning out your build very, very specifically and having time for testing, so on and so forth. How have you found that within DevOps environments, security has now become an integrated element of it, such that we're not testing after the fact, but we're testing pieces of code as we develop and produce them?
Got it. So I think you start, I'll get to that. I think you start with documenting why someone would want to do what you're asking them to do and a benefit to them. So cover how you handle exception handling, how you handle people doing better, meaning you're seeing that they're adopting. How do you treat them differently? So that's a little responsiveness. So if you're not responsive in a security organization, no one gives a shit to do what you want, right? Because it's not their responsibility. I think if you shift the model where if you're targeting their orchestration layer, all SDLC runs through orchestration. Otherwise, we'd never get any software anywhere. It's too complicated. If they provided pipeline as code, pipeline as code, for those who aren't familiar with it, is if I have an orchestration layer, you could literally make a YAML that says X, Y, Z occurs after each other, and it's a piece of code. Security doesn't need to say use tools. Security needs to say, here's the tool I use, here's what it does, here's the values I get, and it checks for you. So that's the value. The tool has no value independently. Automation in itself does jobs, but it doesn't give you what you want out of the orchestration, which is output and decisions. So if you give them pipeline as code for security, and you give them the documentation that says, if you do this and improve, I'm going to do what for you? Maybe loosen the rules, make you get through with less meetings, no cab calls. You're getting treated well because you're adopting and I'm measuring you. You'll spend the time to take that code and put it into yours. But it's not about tools. It's more about what does that pipeline as code do for everybody from a standards perspective? What's the outcome of it? I got a tool. What should the outcome of that tool be? And then will I allow you to progress or not at different stages? Not gating, more of where are you today? I kind of think if you measure today, everybody's in much worse circumstance than they think they are. So don't gate because no one will get through. We're not starting from a polished state. We're starting from smoke and mirrors.
Yep. Let's work with that just a little bit. And as I'm receiving a shout out to the team at CyberX for giving me a feed where I can get all my questions in here, I'm going to start to nestle in a couple of the questions that are coming in as well directly to me. And this is a question on the aspect of speed and efficacy. And I'll reword it just a little bit. And that is this aspect of when you are, whether you are, and I can see that this is coming from a developer, whether you're coming from a standpoint of you're developing for a firm, as a consultant, or you are developing within a firm for your own enterprise, there is the constant knife hanging over your head of speed of delivery and getting applications out quickly. In your perspective, when you take the hat of secure DevOps, does that slow down the process? And if so, how do you explain that?
I would say the statistics say it does. And I'll comment on that. Again, it's just because there is very few models out there that make any sense for security. It's two things. One, as you advance, the more you look at someone else by comparison, right? So developers are advancing much more quickly than the security space because security guys don't code. So there's a gap. Some security guys do code, like I do code, but it's a rare talent. So what's actually happening is because the security guys don't have a way to operate within the context of agility, meaning you don't have a responsive model, you don't provide automation swagger, you don't give pipeline as code security artifacts. What will essentially occur is as you add these components, developers will interpret what you want. They'll build it and put it in. Now, they also don't know what your operating model is, meaning when do I need it? When should it run? They run it all the time. So a perfect example, static code analysis. I want to know if my code that I'm putting in is bad. Coverity, it's a Synopsys product. It's probably one of the top ones out there in the market, same like Veracode. But it's long. You're talking about 40 minutes. Now, do I want to spend 40 minutes every time I run things? No, but I could have a job at night that runs independent of the release to always check the latest release for that sort of thing. So if you have an operating model that doesn't take those circumstances in, that says I need to be fast, but I also need to do security, you get into the circumstance that developers will try to meet the security requirements without the agile mindset. They have to do it is what they're told. Right. But there's so many ways that you could. You don't need to run everything every time. You need to make sure the data's there so that risk is reduced. But it doesn't have to be the standard for everything. And that is, the source is security is not good at DevSecOps as of yet. Developers don't know the bailiwick of security and why they're doing the principles that they are. And unless someone comes to market and says, here's an archetype for a responsive model of how security should operate, you're going to continue down this path of, you're gating me, I'm having meetings, but my pipeline runs without me. So I literally can't run an automated pipeline because I got to meet with that guy, John, on Thursday at 9 a.m. because he has 42 other meetings. It's a terrible model. It's a terrible place, but there are solutions that work.
One thing that I often bring about when I speak on these topics is I talk about building for function and then building for scale. And you've got to build, in my humble opinion, you need to build for scale and you need to build realistically without just looking at building that machine that screams and then what's next. And you've elocuted that very well, because when you're building for scale as well, you've got to have those dynamics of knowing that you're not gating someone, that you're not locking them out of a process that they need to be a part of. But you need to have that conversation. And that's where I would assume that a firm like Benchmark would come in. And that's where the consulting element comes in about how do you manage that entire team set. I want to park that on one side for a moment. And I want to delve into another question that has come in and again, canvas it a little bit different for you. And this is talking about the reality of DevSecOps from a cultural perspective. And not all cultures are created equal, meaning that every culture has a different way of approaching new philosophies around work. Given your experience, you've traveled extensively, you've studied in different environments as well. Do you find that the North American environment is a little different from, let's say, I don't know, the environment in Israel or the environment in other communities where security and DevOps have really found a neat marriage?
Okay, so it kind of comes to what is your perspective? Yep. So in North America, we have a very personalized, selfish perspective. Not just generally, not everybody, but we are about self-achievement. It's not about group achievement. It's not the same as Japan, as you said, Israel or India, where there's more group value than self-value. So what essentially happens is things are taken from the perspective of, did I perform instead of did we perform? So I'll give you an example. When I took over the team, the leader actually had a call with me and said, I'm leaving. I chose you because you scare me. And I was like, wow, that's a good reason to put your team into someone you scare. And he says, no, you scare me because you don't do things the way that we do it today, meaning you don't accept status quo. You challenge it. The team needs help. So I met with his top guy. He set me as top architect. And you pay heavily for top people in security. So you're talking hundreds of thousands. And I asked, tell me your performance. And the response was, I did 20% more work than I did last year. And he had a statistical chart that basically said, oh yeah, I did these amount of tasks, 20%. I'm like, fantastic, the math's good. I then asked the question, if you look at us from a group perspective, the security function of the organization, the reduction of risk in an organization, how much have you covered the way you're operating today? It turned out we were at 10%. So he's like, I do whatever, 28 to 45 tasks. I need to do 275. I'm like, wow, that's bad, isn't it? And he's like, not really. I'm doing and performing very well. I said, no, your mindset is, how do I perform well? Not how does the organization perform well? How does the cyber team perform well? You need to change your operating model. I'm going to show you how. Here is site reliability engineering. Here is DevSecOps. Take a look at it and see how to operate so that you're not gating and have meetings and then look like I'm doing more work, when in reality, you're operating in such a way you'll never finish it. So again, it comes back to North American style of, I must achieve and be valuable, rather than I must help the organization and create value. And I do that as a collaboration effort.
Again, I want to unpack that just a little bit more. You spoke about this idea of I versus we, and the team versus the individual. And we do measure performances individually, but then we also measure it as teams. If we can peel the layer on that just a little bit more, is that within the environments that you run, for example, if you are going in to an environment where there is production happening at the of different softwares and different applications, and you are now bringing in a security perspective into this, how do you allocate roles then within the team? There have to be certain specialists that focus on certain elements of the DevOps process, but also certain elements of the security process as well. Some folks who tie in more into the compliance elements, others who look at the levels of code and what kind of securities we need to look at within the code itself. How do you distribute roles within a team?
Okay, so when you actually start implementing DevSecOps mentalities, what happens is the teams blur. To be honest with you, I had members move from my team to development to my team. There was more of a operating model that was adopted, and it included everybody. So the responsibilities are shared. And this is super hard for a person that takes the perspective of individual performance. I do agree that groups are performed, but it's not taken as my tasks should be group performance. My tasks are individually assigned. That's the problem, is you have a shared responsibility. And unless the operating model includes those stakeholders together, what essentially happens is you construct and reward individual contributions that weren't catered to meet the needs for the entire organization or meet the needs for the entire team. So that's where I think it's all coming from. And when you set the operating model, it doesn't matter who has the responsibility. It's more of, is the operating model functioning as it's supposed to? Oh, and you three guys are part of it. Until we start sharing, and North America's not really good at sharing. Like, I kind of like, even with my daughter, I'm trying very hard. She always yells at me, it's mine. I'm not trying to get that way. She's just growing up that way because we're focusing entirely on her satisfaction and happiness, when we should be focusing on the family as a whole and the satisfaction. So it happens within organizations too. I don't think we've noticed the subtle thing about our culture within Canada. But yeah, we don't have a very close-knit community. You don't have neighbors just walking into your house and saying, hey, have a pie. We have structure that says when you move in, here's a basket. Yeah. But it's not conducive for a long-term group mindset, which is DevSecOps. It's all about shared responsibility.
Fantastic. And what's interesting is that if you talk about this element of shared, especially as cost cutting, so on and so forth, then there are different perspectives, and I think you elocuted one right at the beginning of knowing how much danger we're in right now, fiscally, economically, and security wise. There has been a very strong push across industries to share services and share resources, and I could argue specifically within the public sector, the idea of a shared CISO, virtual CISO, so on and so forth. A member of the CyberX board, Farouk Nair, for example, the shared CISO for the universities and colleges, there is this push to share resources. We share a lot of cloud resources as well. But you are right, is that we have built these silos within our expertise, and this can create certain situations. Now, I do want to target this concept a little bit more, but I'll park it away so that I can go to some of the other concepts that I wanted to discuss with you. I want to look at the point of time at which Benchmark would come in to set the situation straight. Do you normally find yourself as the CTO and as someone who is an emblem for secure DevOps, do you find yourself coming into companies once a particular operation has been completed and there's been a situation, or do you find yourself coming in at the very onset? When do you see clients reaching out to you to say, we need help?
I generally find they've gone through the planning and implemented some archetype. That archetype is from the perspective of automation and function, like you mentioned before. The value is still unable to be sustained and scaled. It's stuck in POC. The reason is for multiple, which, as you said, people, process, and technology. But actually, I find the most important piece of it is if I have a shared responsibility, I need a shared medium. That shared medium is called orchestration. So it takes functional requirements, which are automation or tools, and it orchestrates them together. Think of it as glue for shared responsibility. Unless you create a good working model of that orchestration pipeline, that shared responsibility fails. It doesn't scale. It's missing components of how it will look like. And there are very few organizations out there today that actually have achieved a working function for shared responsibility using an orchestration layer. Usually the vendors that create the orchestration layers are specific to a stakeholder. Sneak, Jenkins, they're for devs. Wait a minute. But it's a shared responsibility. So why did you build it for security and ops? Oh, it's too much to lift. Well, then you have no shared responsibility orchestration layer. There are some companies out there that have taken the perspective of the business. The business wants availability. The business wants to control cost. The business wants security fitness. Those are generalized shared responsibilities.
Yeah.
Those orchestration layers. One of the examples is like Harness out there. They just had a huge conference called Unscripted where no one was allowed to prepare. I loved it. Their context is if I provide you, and this is the key for all shared responsibilities, the enjoyment of software for all stakeholders. That is the key for sustaining and scaling. If I get jealous of what you use, if I enjoy the software and the method and operating model you have, I will adopt. If I don't, kick it to the curb. You did it wrong. That's not a shared responsibility. So that is where we're generally engaged. Most people have spent extremely heavy for multiple years. And then we come in and say, here's a better model. We'll implement it in 2 months. And then they look at you and they're like, show us. So that it's more of once you've operated with a shared model that works and people are like, wow, I enjoy software. How many times have you heard someone, the most important part of an RFP or request is the enjoyment of using the software? And I was like, that's key, but no one ever asks for it because how do you quantify it? You quantify it by how much it's sustained and scaled across the organization, which we don't measure vendors for. We don't measure products for that. But it's the most important piece, which is, am I getting value out of the things that I bought that was going to work for me, or am I working for the technology? And that is all our customers today. They are working for the technology. The technology is not working for them. They have automation, not orchestration. And then it leaves the security out. You have automated security that doesn't orchestrate, so you get no value out of it other than I got a checkbox that I did static code analysis. And how many findings did you have? What's acceptable for the environment?
Absolutely. And I do want to I want to comment on that just a little bit and also come back to this aspect of you've spoken a lot about static analysis. I do want to unpack for our audience a little bit about what we mean by dynamic analysis as well. But just all of the points that you brought up tie in very neatly to the previous power hours. To our audience that's out there, you're seeing lots of different stats coming on the lower thirds, some stats taken from the Benchmark Corp directly, some inputs from them as well. Three things that I really want to go back to. If you think about when we had a conversation with Danny Pahar, constantly ask this question about what's the value that you're bringing to the table. We think about the conversation that we had, for example, with Shay Rumble, Department of National Defense. People know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. They know what they're paying for, but they don't quite know what value it orchestrates. And thirdly, if you just take it back, way back when, to one of the first power hours that we did with with Kat Kood as well, where she talked about the aspect of understanding that security is not just about the checkbox element. Sarah Qureshi spoke about this as well. There's much more to it, which takes me to this area where it's it's another Pandora's box of all sorts of different topics, but we'll try and pick one or two from them. And that is this aspect of when you're doing software development, when you're doing DevOps, and so on and so forth. What are some of the common vulnerabilities that are often missed in that process, and why then does your process become so integral? Shlomo?
Okay, so I take it from the context of what do I have today that I can use rather than what should I be doing. Because if you go down the path of I need to buy something, it's going to hinder your ability to start. So I always say, what's our stack?
Yep.
List out the stack and then categorize what that stack goes into. And then value in a security department in a DevSecOps world has nothing to do with gates. It has to do with the word delta. So if DevSecOps is now measuring security, meaning what's my security fitness, using the tools I have, or I'm not using the tools appropriately that I have. It's not about which ones should I have. I mean, I've had an organization come to me and say, I use Sonar. Why would I need another tool like Veracode? And I said, they do different code coverage. One does better for this coding language. One does better for this coding language. And it's good to have both. But they're like, I already got the checkbox for the first one. So I'm more about what tools do you have? Are you getting the value of them rather than which ones should I be using and which categories do they fall into? So it's more of use the assets appropriately and the value. Don't gate security. If you have a regulatory compliance, even PCI gives you 90 days to remediate. Don't gate. Most security guys start with that fact of, nope, bad. That doesn't help anybody, right? Telling someone they can't go through the doors is one problem. Letting them know they're not going to go through the door at the development stage is really good. That's my context of shift left. Let people know your requirements at the start, not make them do your requirements. And then track the delta. So this is hugely important. This is what I put into DevOps Institute's courseware for DevSecOps. I wrote modules for them. The most important thing that you can do is reward a delta that's improving and slow down the delta that's degrading. I.e., if someone is slowly degrading their security coverage, I'm going to come back to them and say, I need to put more controls on you. I apologize, but you're degrading. I don't care that you started at 4% compliance. I care that you're 3. If you move to 6, you move to 10, I'm going to treat you extremely well, and I'm going to remove shackles that are slowing you down and say, now that you're doing this, no cab meeting. You are doing a fantastic job. We're going to measure your output that you're increasing your security coverage. I don't care that you're at 12%. I care that you went from 8 to 12. This is the persona that's being missed. We kind of see ourselves as stewards and gatekeepers. We're more of facilitators. We're more of the evangelists to say security can be done and help you advance, and you can do it without hindrances. And I'm not going to be a hindrance. You don't need a meeting with me. So those things I kind of find aren't happening today. We are entirely finding you have to have meetings and you have to have a head shake to get things going. That's totally against the practice of any agile practice. Meetings, they're good for planning. They're not good for delivery.
Yep. Let's work with that just a little bit more. And you brought up the two important elements around the agility aspect, as well as the aspect of I'm not too concerned at the fact that your score is 12%. I'm not concerned of where you are. I'm concerned about how you got there, and I'm focusing on how and when you got there. And I think this raises another point, is not just rewarding that, but then making someone an example for the team and allowing that sharing to continue. I cannot underestimate how important this is if you are leading a team. And this is fundamental. I think people forget this, that when you are practicing security, I said this earlier on, you are also leading by example. Yeah, and you have to show, you got to create examples of people who have followed certain rules, so on and so forth, and reward that. And that really points to the aspect of leadership. That's why I'm really hoping that when Shlomo is at the CISO forum in about 2.5 or 3 weeks from now, this becomes one of those questions and topics as well around leadership attributes of security practitioners. We can talk about that at CISO forum. I am going to now thread in another question because we've got about 22 odd minutes left. And I expected this question to come speaking about the vulnerabilities within DevSecOps. We always say this, and if you're me and you're a fan of Narcos, for example, and you pay close attention to those kind of shows, you'll know that a common line that has often been said is that the most dangerous enemy is the enemy that's hiding in plain sight. How much of insider threats have you had to deal with in your career?
I would tackle it a little differently. I'm going to answer the question, but in an unorthodox way, which is my style. When we set security policies and standards, I generally find they are too static. So I'm a believer in a security charter that has fitness, not standards. So what occurs and why you have internal vulnerabilities or external vulnerabilities or intruders or malicious actors, I kind of see it as we've created standards that they get familiar with and can circumvent very easily. Now, if you implement what I stated before, is if I have an orchestration layer and then I actually add code to measure security fitness of that layer, I can change 100% the measure of you complying 100% on a regular cadence, which changes the protection levels for any malicious actor. Organizations that have 100% and need it are organizations doing DevSecOps wrong. 100% can be touched or get near, shift it further, and then everybody starts moving towards the new norm, which then prevents internal and external actors from figuring out easy ways to circumvent security because they're static. So you get, this is the biggest and scariest thing to say, and I guarantee no one on the call has any fixes for it because only some people have code to fix this. Orchestration is static. Security coverage becomes static in that pipeline. You have a method to go to prod that stays the same and doesn't advance like a human being does. Like you and I, as we learn more, our practice improves. We can make errors. That's why we don't use ourselves anymore. We want to do it independent. But code is static when it comes to a pipeline. I'm using it to deliver. But if I leave it static, vulnerabilities will fester. Internal and external people will find them and exploit them unless you do security fitness over the orchestration layer and regularly change the 100% standard higher so no one ever attains it. Now you're treating people better as they attain it. So I'm also not a believer in karma dashboards because that went disastrously wrong. So I do like highlighting winners and what winning looks like for jealousy, but not a karma dashboard, because if you really do this in an organization, I'm not aware of one as of yet that has their handle on this really well. Everybody's Darth Vader, not Luke Skywalker. And it's not purposeful. Like I did a Star Wars theme one time and everybody was Darth Vader and they're like, dude, are you just highlighting we all are bad?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, there's one person that's Luke Skywalker. And they're like, I know, but it makes us all feel bad that we're so far away. Just highlight the Luke Skywalker to us and leave out that whoever is falling behind. From a leadership perspective, that's terrible. You need to highlight the people who are falling behind from a KPI perspective, but don't shove it in everybody's face. Make it a medium that's for leadership, not for everybody to know who's good, who's bad, because then it's like a social comparison. It defeats your motivation.
Yeah. Shlomo, Einstein said that the measure of intelligence is our adaptability to change. And I think you've highlighted that very strongly, is that by saying you can come close to the 100%, but then the cheese or the yardstick is constantly going to move because the the environment that we're in, the types of attacks that we're seeing. It's not just about something found a vulnerability in a PHP script. There are other levels of attacks that are being formed, and the adversaries that we're dealing with are finding new ways and new methodologies to come at applications, to find those open doors and unlocked windows, for lack of a better word. And hence we have to constantly keep moving that needle. It's a process, it's not perfection. And I really like the way you've canvassed that. There's another question that I think ties in very well to some comments that you made earlier on about the leadership qualities that one has to display when they're leading teams in this DevSecOps kind of environment. And this has a question to do with, probably even ties into something I said, which is the aspect of scale. When we think of larger organizations, we can see a process like this taking shape from its embryonic stage all the way to becoming a full-grown organism and a practice within an organization. But we do have a lot of small to medium businesses listening to us today. In fact, as part of CISO Forum, as Maddie just sent me a note, we also have a topic, especially around cybersecurity for small businesses. It looks like the process that you're augmenting comes at a very heavy price tag. Can you comment on that a little, Shlomo?
Okay, so there's a few comments there that I need to make. One is, if you have anything that's toil related, if you have configuration or infrastructure and you're doing it by hand, someone will then say, well, I need enterprise support. And the reality, because it's production, the reality to it is you have no support today. You do it by hand. Who's giving you support for hands? And then they're like, yeah, you're right. I just do it by hand in a SOP and a MOP, operating procedure. And I'm like, well, if you do it as code, then they don't need to work on that. And you didn't pay anything for it. It's open source. As well as the leadership side, the leadership side is complicated because you need to change how you reward people, even though it hurts your business. Now I'll explain by that. Today's model is reward heroics, right? Heroes are highly valued. The heroes are heroes because they want to be them. They're not heroes because the organization wants them to be heroes. It's the hero himself who is feeling rewarded for doing the good. But the good is self-value. The good isn't repetition. The good isn't an inner source model. The good isn't a template library. So on my side, as a leader, I let those people go. I was like, you're my hotshots, but you operate as you being the value and not the business and not the team. I give you a chance. I want you to measure your tasks from a repeatability metric. If the task you do could be used by someone else, meaning usability or repeatability, then I'm going to reward you if you make it for everybody. Now it gets complicated because the smarter the person is, the less likely they're going to make it for someone else because they look at it as a 2-minute item while a 14-hour item for someone else. So the most important thing of a leader is to say, regardless of how much time you spend on something, measure it from the value of someone else, and I will reward you when you make it for consumption of others, not for me or one-time use case or making you a hero. So I'm going to stop rewarding heroes in the security space. I'm going to start rewarding the ones that are actually creating content for others, that create template libraries that are consumable, do inner source training so that you gain from other people's wins, and then measure each task you do without rosy glasses. Super stellar guys look at some things and they put their glasses on and they think to themselves, this is a really easy task. Why would I need to automate it? Why do others need it? It's so simple. It only takes 2 seconds. And my context there is, for you. So if they tell me, oh, this is what I did, and I say, well, that didn't help anybody, I'm actually just going to say, you know what, I don't find that as a benefit to the business. I need you to start looking at things differently. Yes, you're amazing. Make it amazing for others. Stop looking at it as something that's so simple to do and that you're the one that does it. So that's where the leader needs to change things. Don't reward your top talent. Reward the top talent that give talent to others by sharing their talent. And if they don't do it, don't reward them, even if they're super smart and great, because that's not top talent. That's an individual contributor. Individual contributors only have a certain amount of scale. It's bad for security if they don't move into the new model.
This is so true. And I'd like to put that on a shirt if I could fit that on one, because again, fundamental to all of this, a lot of our listeners here manage teams, manage a lot of DevOps environments, and that sharing of talent and sharing of skill set is such a fundamental element, which I'll highlight as the aspect of communication within a team. And there's a reason why if you look at many graduate courses that are out there right now across the board, let alone at my own institution, but other ones as well, in security, in IT development, whatever have you, there is a dedicated course on communications and team skills. That's why I highly encourage folks, for example, if you've got together a good team, consider participating in the collegiate penetration testing competition. Get into these environments that force you to think together and share your skills. So thank you, Shlomo, for these wonderful 2 rupees of thought. It's brilliant and really neat takeaways for people, not just technically, but operationally as well, as we have a very wide audience. We got another 10 minutes. So, and I have 6 questions here. I'm going to try rushing through all of them as best as I can. We'll probably get to about 2 or 3. Everybody else, if we don't get to your questions, message Shlomo on cyberexchange.ca. Remember earlier on, Shlomo, I brought out this aspect of people, process, and technology. And COVID-19 has kind of opened me to the reality of it's now people, place, process, and technology. Because when you are a group and working together, for example, the environments that I run, we normally have huddles physically. We share a table, we share a machine set, we share a lot of space, we break bread together, etc. Has COVID-19 and the movement of remote, the hyper remotization, if that's even a word, of staff, has that impacted your work in secure DevOps?
I actually think the response is people and leaders. So if your leader knows how to make connections with their team and how to make them motivated, regardless of where they are, it's the pressure on the leader. So what's happening is most organizations, regardless of the technology that they have, those that have bad technology, forget it. Your experience is going to be crap regardless of the leader. So I could give you a list of, I don't want to say which organizations, they don't even have working VPNs. So I'm on a call with them and they're losing audio and they're dropping video. So I'm like, this isn't okay because the end result is you can't communicate. So what they'll do is just call each other on phones. As a leader, though, as COVID puts the pressures on people that are outside their capabilities or outside their technologies, you're going to have to find a way to bridge that gap. And what I mean by that is call out and see how someone's doing. It's kind of like if you don't have the mindset of I'm here to help you as a leader, or if you think of it as do my tasks, you're done. If you think of it as I'm here to help you and you call and see what the issues are and you try to solve them, I kind of feel like the most important thing you can do today is send a home care package. That's what I did within our organization. I even have one at home. I got my own. I shipped people a wireless access point that was enterprise grade into their house that auto configured itself. I guarantee high quality. It's simple. The experience is solved, but again, the pressures at home are still there. So you still, as a leader, need to call in and say, "Can I help you? You got a lot of shit going on. I need you to be motivated without everybody around you. I'm here to communicate and bridge those gaps if you're uncomfortable." If you tackle the 2 pieces, fix the house if they're at the house, give them some goodies. And then when it comes to the personal pressures, if the weather's bad for 5 days, give them a damn call and say, "Dude, I know the weather's bad for 5 days. You haven't seen people for a long time. Let's chat."
Yeah.
That's enough. That's enough. That solves the COVID thing. You got my back. You care about me. And you sent me technology to make it work for me in the home, which is just crashing all the time.
Fantastic. And I think it's those constant reminders as well. So I'll curve back on my commentary because, again, the next 3 questions that I see here are particularly appetizing, and one that I was 100% sure would be coming, and that is on the aspect of the role of AI in secure DevOps. I'm not going to flush that out any much more. Your perspective on where AI fits into the orchestration process.
Okay, so I have a
Bearing
unique
in mind,
unique
vendors are
perspective
selling
here.
this idea.
Okay, so I did a conference yesterday, actually, and I had to prove why AI has specific use cases and other ones that they're bad.
Yep.
In unique scenarios where there is no stability, AIs can't work. It's very clear. Images or new threats, AI doesn't help. They just identify anomalies and then it's noise, and then everybody ignores the noise. You have to understand that AI is actually in its infancy. In like 2017 or 18, we analyzed the $1 billion AI that Google made, and they quantified it as an IQ of 49, equivalent to a 6-year-old. So that is a company that spent billions on it. So just assume that the other companies didn't spend that and the IQ may be lower than a 6-year-old. Understand that context, which is, in my world, I follow a different principle. I follow AI is very good to find issues in development and risks in development, but not for production. For production, I want to use chaos engineering in lower levels so that red teams attack environments in development. You have systems that then react or make your applications invulnerable. So I kind of follow the model of, if you use chaos engineering principles, test automation, attacking chaos in lower level environments, the AI for production isn't really a requirement because I've reduced my risk rather than preventing it. So this is what I talked about. Very important to understand that AI should not be a crutch. AI should give you visibility to reduce the threat before you put it in. If you put it in and use the AI to prevent it, what are you doing? At some point, it won't prevent it and it'll get through. Use the principle of attack your lower level systems, just like you do with infrastructure to break it and find resilience of applications. Attack them in lower levels to reduce the risk so that when they go to prod, you don't need the AI. That's my perspective. I'm very concerned that people who create AI systems are using it as confidence that things will be reacted to. But they don't understand the infancy of the area, even with billion-dollar systems. No one has Google's AI. And the funny thing about it, the one principle that everybody misses is, and I'm not against AI, I think it's good for highlighting anomalies, making decisions very bad. It doesn't understand context.
Yep.
That is the most important thing in our lives. If I'm driving slow on the highway, don't recommend to me a faster route. I'm going 90 in a 100 zone. Do you think I want to rush? Those are the types of contexts that machines miss. An example would be if I did a hackathon or I did a hack fest and I attack the systems. The system doesn't know that this is a hackathon or a hack fest. It's going to prevent people from learning anything. Again, these systems are just mapping types to responses. They're good to have before you figured out your chaos engineering. But when you figure out how to attack your systems and make them resilient and invulnerable, and everybody says, oh, it's not possible. Yeah, it totally is. Make a read-only application. Like, I don't follow. If you get there, then you can take the AI out. Until you have the chaos done, use AI.
Yep.
Because you need a crawl, walk, run. AI will supplement you while you can't deal with things fast enough. But as you build your engineering principles to become and create resilient systems, you can remove it because at that point, you're finding all the mistakes before it goes in.
Absolutely. And speaking of that aspect of context, I've often been a firm believer, and I think we're reading from the same page, if not the entire same chapter, is the human element of all of this and context. And just for our audience, I will encourage you to just take a little bit of time to read up on when Google had begun its image recognition practices, and read up a little bit on what happened when certain images were tagged wrongly and the racial undertones that were spewed by it. I'm also a firm believer in this aspect of, if you are going to deploy AI, and I took issue with Dr. Ali slightly with this from University of Guelph last week, is that the more of this that you are deploying, the more human intelligence it requires and the more specialization it requires to find for context. And I do believe dealing with millions of data sets and databases, or what we call data lakes or whatever have you, very falsely, if you ask me, we do have to be cautious about how we monitor and how we validate those data sets. And our universe changes, especially COVID-19 is a very good example of that. I'll take one more question, Shlomo, and then we're going to come towards a soft landing, and then we'll bid you adieu. Shlomo, and that is the aspect of the work that you do at Benchmark Corp. You are the CTO. We see, you've probably dealt with a gazillion companies in different aspects. How is your team set up at Benchmark Corp? Do you have consultants that report back into you, or do you have actual folks who step into the whole DevOps process and help customers and clients as if they were part of that technical team?
So it's two pieces, and it's unique because my sales team had to learn I have no authority. And I like organizations that have no authority. What you have is a guild. And organizations look at guilds very differently. In our guild, it's more of helping each other to meet the needs of the customer. So someone asked me and said, hey, can you allocate a resource? I said, no. I'll talk about it with you who I think is good, but I'm not going to allocate or use any authority. Talent doesn't need authority. You need them to do what they do best. What they need is everybody to come together and support each other. And a hierarchy in an organization is completely useless in respect to meeting customer needs when you have really high talent pool. Our side is more about bringing the top talent pool and then letting them do what they do best and giving them guidance. From my side, do I need people to report to me? Nope. Do they? Maybe. Do I care? Not at all. When I go to the customer, I help from the context of a contributor and providing value. The team that works with me are just also doing the same mindset. We're going to get the customer to success. What does success look like? Way beyond what they thought it was going to be, right? So we generally have as feedback, we just closed the deal like a week ago, and they wrote, we were very, very pleased. I'm like, you need two varies, isn't it verbose? But that's what I was looking for. Was there any authority or directives? Not really. We target the customer needs. We created the board to achieve the tasks. No one cared whose role you were. The reason being is I care about what's in their mind, not the title that they have. So that's how I lead talent. I think that's how every leader should lead talent, which is support them and don't think of anybody on a pedestal. Actually, lower yourself below them so that you listen. That's how I work. That's how I operate, even from our customers. I may know a lot, but when I talk to someone, I put myself below them and I listen.
Yeah, I think the last part I was talking to Serge from CrowdStrike, who you may know, and we underscored the same idea. It's about the unknown unknowns, and more importantly at that, it's about knowing what you do not know. So I really appreciate that you've augmented that so well. I'm a firm believer when I think about cybersecurity is that there's a science to it, but there's also an art to it. And I think you've really, really well exemplified that aspect of the art of cybersecurity. And as you know very well, art ultimately brings out a revolution, and you are without a doubt revolutionizing the world of DevOps and
It's the
DevSecOps.
shirt. It's all
And
the
that
shirt's
shirt
work.
is a very good testimony to that and the role of art in your own life. We've got 2 more minutes, Shlomo, and I have to ask this question because I think peeling in a little bit more into the mind of Shlomo is an important element for our listeners today if you want to get into this revolutionary mindset around DevSecOps. Shlomo, who's been the one major inspiration in your career?
I don't have the name specifically, but Google basically hired, he's probably 12 now. He was out of India. He was leading, I think he said at 6, he was building AIs. And Google hired him as a principal architect for their AI space. I think one of his most important items was, and it resonated with me and it stayed with me, was understand where the AI is today, not as a threat, but at what we need to build from where we are. And then the biggest risk of AI is not the threat to humanity, it's false negatives.
Yep.
Which is, I didn't catch it because I relied on the machine. And I'll give an example of it. There, you can look it up. Basically, imagery for cancer. They built a machine to tell you if you have cancer or not. False negatives took lives.
Yep.
And the context of it was, well, machines weren't good at unique scenarios of each body type. It's good at making standards and then applying those standards to what it thought. Each human body is very unique. So what was happening, it was missing cancer in lots of patients. The false negative is the highest risk for anybody who relies on things like that. He gave me that context long ago. Do your research when you're relying on a technology to do a job for you, regardless of what it is of machine learning or AI or orchestration. Measure its fitness. If you measure its fitness, regardless of who's doing it, machine or person, then you'll know where they need to go, and then you'll make your adaptations. Again, never perfect, always adapting.
Measure the fitness, always adaptive, and know the kill switch, if I may add to that. Shlomo, a book that has influenced you in your career.
I write a lot of white papers, so
Yep.
those influence me.
Fair enough.
From a technology perspective, this is actually a personal issue that I have. We need more do. I kind of find like there was a Ford basically published how to manufacture on scale. I kind of found that was the starting point of understanding how to build complex systems. That was the most impactful, but I kind of find the do today is a lack within the book area. I don't want to call out any particular ones that I don't like. What I find is if you don't touch on the do and the how, and you give a story, the story doesn't help anybody. The story may give you context. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is you can't change your state. It may help you have awareness to your state. I'm focused and always been focused on the practitioner side. So I like books that are more on the maybe more on the technical applicable side, because organizations have so much pain. Being aware of the pain is going to happen by pain being there. You don't need a book to tell you have pain. You're going to see it. The book's got to give you stuff you can use.
Yep.
So Ford got it right when they published how to, economies of scale, how to manufacture at scale. Since then, we've been focused on the stuff that draws attention and fantastic stories, but those stories don't fix the situation. So I'm looking for it. I'm waiting for it in DevOps, DevSecOps. I don't see many books doing the practitioner side. I see many books telling fantastic stories. We are in a huge amount of loss of spend with COVID pressures. I know we're running out of time. IDC said we waste out of 1.3 trillion, 900 billion on stuff that fails. That's terrible. The world can't just keep producing spend on things that don't work out. So write books that show people how to do it, not technical manuals. Give expertise and intellectual property directly to your readers. We're hiding the IP and we got to let it out. And that's why white papers are a really good place to do it. Give people IP they can use.
Fantastic. I'm going to make some closing comments now, Shlomo, before we wrap up and wish our audience adieu and wish them a good weekend. I'm going to ask you also, Shlomo, as to once we close up, to meet me in the green room so that we can have a quick wrap up of our discussions. To our audience, I really hope that you paid attention to not just the technical aspects that myself and Shlomo went through, but the social pieces, the pieces around leadership. I've said this many times, and Durham Recruiting, which is a well-known recruiting firm in the area that I'm in, close to Durham College and a partner of my college, their CEO often says, we hire for skill and we fire for fit. This was a very good conversation on the fit within a DevSecOps team. Earlier when I began the conversation, I referred to Shlomo as a genius. I never knew Shlomo until I actually got introduced to him thanks to Maddie from CyberX and the team at CyberX. And I'm really grateful for that introduction, because now he's changed my orientation to how I lead my teams as well. And more importantly than that, you will get to hear Shlomo at the CISO Forum happening in about 2.5 to 3 weeks from now. And I hope that this partnership with Benchmark Corp continues to grow so that we can share such kind of IP with one another. Sometimes it's not necessarily about the return of investment on the sale. It's about how many minds you can orient and orchestrate to this revolutionary way of thinking when it comes to DevOps. I'll say this again, I refer to him as a genius. And with his candidness, he often talked about the shit that we put our teams through. There's a fine line between who's stupid and a genius. And that fine line is that there are limits to genius, but there's no limits to stupidity. So you pick which end of the spectrum you want to be a part of. Thank you, Shlomo, for all of your time, for talking to us about the role of prevention being far better than cure in the world of security. Guess what, guys? Noah didn't build the ark when it was raining. He had that foresight. Shlomo has given you a little bit of that foresight today in a wonderful, powerful power hour. I thank you for joining me. I'll have Shlomo say goodbye, and then I'll meet him in the green room. Shlomo, closing comments to you.
I mean, when you talk like that and raise me, because I take the humble approach, a leader never can say good things about himself. So with all the banter you gave me that's positive toward myself, for sure, it's going to be a strong partnership between CyberX and Benchmark.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good weekend, and Shlomo, I'll see you in the green room.
Cheers.